Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Global Economy here on KSA2. This is your host, Ahmed Al-Tahini, with a new episode of this new program. We've been with you for the last 3 weeks or so. We wish everybody a prosperous year, inshallah, and hope that this year will be economically, inshallah, more successful for Saudi Arabia and for all the Arabs generally. I'd like to welcome my guest, Mr. طلعت حافظ, an economic expert. Thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ahmed, for having me on the show. And we wish, as you said, the prosperous year 2011.
Inshallah. Mr. طلعت حافظ, of course, our topic tonight, and let me just first introduce it to our audience. Tonight we'll be talking about job security and how to make a choice whether to work in the government sector or the private sector. And also how that affects the individuals, the economic status of the individual, and as a result, how it contributes to a more vibrant and more successful or stronger economy. Of course, there are many issues that we'll be talking about. Those of you who are about to graduate and those of you who are wondering whether to stay in the government or move to the private sector or vice versa. Also, we'll be talking about all the important parameters or important elements that surround this main issue. We'll also be highlighting an interesting study in the United States about the two Americas, as they call it here, public sector versus private sector. But let me first start with Mr. طلعت حافظ to tell us his perspective on this particular issue. How important is job security and how an individual is affected by this kind of thinking and this puzzle, whether to stay in the government or move to the private sector or the other way around?
Well, Mr. Ahmed, I believe you are hitting on a very emotional and very controversial issue, which is job security.
Of course.
Now, job security, in my humble opinion, it has two sides of the equation, or one would view it very negative, to say job security, because the negative part of it, when you have a job security, that you care less. You just, your job is secure, so whether you perform or you underperform, you don't perform, it's either way, it's acceptable. Now, on the other hand, when you talk about job security in the private sector, it's becoming a very sensitive issue. Now, in the private sector, job security is as long as you're a good performer, and you're performing very well and overperform, you secure your job by itself. It goes without saying.
It's your skills that speak for you.
Skills that speak for you. Right. Now, in the government sector, public sector, whether being the government public sector in the kingdom or otherwise or elsewhere, usually a lot of the grads, new grads and graduates, they go to the government for many reasons. One of these reasons is they think or they believe, and they could be rightly so, that job is secure no matter if you perform or underperform.
Right.
Whether if you punctual, whether when you come on time, you don't come on time, it's irrelevant to the job requirement, which I believe that's maybe an overstretched point and over-exaggerated, if you will. But again, if you compare notes with the private sector is so strict. We do have a job security, of course, in other words, in the banking sector, or in the retail sector, or in the health sector. On the private sector, I do understand, I do appreciate you cannot fire people just like this.
There's a labor law.
There is a labor law that governs
the whole operation.
Whole operation employment. But performance become the name of the game. Performance become as the whether you make it or you break it in the private sector, where we have standard goals, where you have to achieve. And if you achieve your goals, you are in business. If you don't achieve your goals, there is explanation to it. But if you continuously don't achieve your goals and targets for, 2 or 3 years in a row, that's an issue that would definitely harm in the job security terminology.
Okay, interesting. In this study, let's go a little bit to the United States. I tried to find some studies here in Saudi. I wasn't able to locate some because of my poor searching skills, but I managed to find this one, which is quite relevant to what we're talking about. It talks about public sector versus private sector. Yes. According to a December report from the BLS, state and local government employers spent an average of $39.83 per hour worked, and 26.24 for wages and 13.60 for benefits. The total employee compensation in September 2009, the total employer compensation costs for private industry workers averaged $27.49 per hour. That is 19.45 for wages and 8.05 for benefits. Now, in other words, a government or government employees make 45% more on average than private sector employees. This is an interesting...
That's to my surprise.
It is quite surprising. Maybe in comparison, you know, they were comparing certain areas,
certain level
or
of
industries. There are, of course, other charts that talk about various things, performance issues. They talk about how many, the productivity issues also. Many things, there's also the environment itself, the work environment. There is the career development, the professional development, of course, the continuous professional development. Some of them, they call it the personal development plan, professional development plan. Different names, but they all center around the same idea, which is development. Now, let's talk about the issue of development itself. I mean, this might help our, graduating students, or those who are about to graduate, or those who are wondering about whether they go to the government or to the private sector. Now, what is the difference? In the government, definitely there are development programs, but if you compare them to the private sector, is there, are they quite comparable, or is there a difference, or how do you...
No, definitely, if you compare the public sector versus the private sector, you're not comparing apple to an apple. Definitely, I do appreciate, and I do agree with you 100% that the government of the public sector, they have their own training programs, what have you. Yes. But I think it's more than training in the private sector. You continuously need to be trained. Simply, if you're taking the banking sector where I come from, technology do change. If I'm not exaggerating, if I'm not saying day to day, but definitely from year to another, so there is a lot of change, especially in the technology itself and the e-banking, what have you. So this is why you need a continuous and ongoing training. Also the skills, or the way that you manage the technical take on the treasury side of the business. The treasury, always we have new products, new solutions to customers, what we call, quote-unquote, total financial solutions.
This requires creativity.
This requires creativity, and requires to be with equal footing with the international. You're not working in isolation with the rest of the world. Now, taking this into consideration, that the kingdom is member of the G20, and that's a responsibility by itself, the only Arab country member of the G20. So that's put you under severe pressure, is to be at equal footing and equal bar with the rest of the world. Again, we part of the WTO. That's another pressure on banks and private sector to cope with the changes. We no longer isolated in a small place, away from the rest of the world. So this is where the private sector mandates and demands an ongoing training. I'm not saying a daily training, but definitely, if I take myself as an example, definitely in a year I must be trained twice, whether being abroad or local, and not only just a training, but a training in best schools. Whether being internationally or local, like international, like Harvard Business School or Wharton School, what have you, in the United States of America, or IMD in Switzerland, or in the kingdom, like King Fahd Petroleum, for King Fahd University for Petroleum Mineral, King Saud University, Institute of IOB, and so on and so forth. So even the quality of training is different versus the government, because the private sector, let's assume they have the means to spend for training. But The private sector requirement, on the other hand, is, I think it's more than the public sector. You mentioned about the productivity. In the private sector, if they spend the real on you, on training, or on whatever, sharpening your skill, they expect a 10 real returns, and that's a difference.
Sure.
I don't believe in the government. You have the pressure at such. We'll take it just, we take, a small calculation. The government starts 7:30, they finish at 2:30 or around that time, where the private sector, they start probably at 8 until 5, and it's stretchable, stretch hours, sometimes 5.5, sometimes 6, 7,
a
long day.
Yes, they do work many hours.
They do,
definitely. Some over the weekend as well.
And over the weekend sometimes, we have some of the sections in the back, like the Treasury, because, we have the Thursday and Friday, while the Saturday and Sunday, Thursday and Friday, the rest of the world is working, so they come Thursday and Friday, whereas, this is their vacation or days off for their family. So I think the demand and the social demand and the pressure on the private sector employee, I don't say 10 times, but definitely it's more than a public sector employee.
Right.
For sure.
Now, if we look at the government sector, for example, there are certain government agencies which are quite semi-private. They're very close. They're very similar in the way they operate, in the way they carry out their daily, operations, in the way they deal with their employees. There is accountability. There is constant follow-up and everything. But also, you look at some ministries where they're more relaxed about things, and the productivity level isn't as high as you would hope for, and that is a problem. I mean, if, let's say, a graduate of a good university or a good college, very highly qualified, has more than the entry level skills for the market, be it public or private, they go into a ministry where only a fraction of their education and skills is utilized. That's quite disappointing.
Yes, indeed. You mentioned that I do appreciate that some of the public employees, in fact, they work harder than the private sector.
Sure.
That's for sure.
Yes.
If you take the security side of the public sector, I'm sure these gentlemen, they work around the clock just to make us secure.
They have to cope.
They have to cope with the pressure. If you take yourself, gentlemen, in the Ministry of Information, I mean, the TV station and the radio station is around the clock, 24 hours, 7 over 24 or 24 over 7, working, the whole week.
Sure.
But I'm sure, and I assume that, this special kind of job task, and they are hopefully they are compensated. Maybe not as the private sector is compensated, but definitely is compensated if you compare notes with the, as you mentioned. I'm not saying, take like a Ministry of Labor. They're not required to work at night, like the Ministry of Interior and keeping security in place and whatever. Or in that regard, maybe Ministry of Commerce and Industry, what have you. But I'm sure, or Ministry of Agriculture in that regard. But I'm sure the employees in the security part, and they are more compensated versus a normal public employee. They have housing programs, they have bonuses, they have a bit of high salary, they have
incentives.
They have allowances, incentives for them to keep the good work and.
And
the exertion and the efforts that they put to secure our beautiful country. So I tend to agree with you that some of the jobs do differ. Now, when you have a public employee, transferring to a private sector, he will have a challenge for a while until he's really skillful enough to cope with the private sector pressure, meaning in that regard longer hours, as we mentioned. Now, until recently, the banks used to work Thursday. Thursday was not up.
Yes, they had
two shifts.
Yeah.
But alhamdulillah, luckily, we shifted, to one shift, and also we have that Thursday and Friday, and that's good for too many aspects. We went through a very extensive study. It's good for the social impact of it, for the family. To be around with your family for full 2 days, and also it's good for many reasons, for the traffic when you have one shift versus 2 shifts. So we thought that working one shift and working 5 days a week is more enough to, especially in the banking sector. Now you have the e-banking, it's all over the place. We have more than 10,500 ATM machines around the kingdom. We have more than 72,000 point of sale, the phone banking, the internet banking. So really it's barely that you go on call or visit like before that we used to do a branch. So the technology part of the banking, the e-banking has helped us a lot to have the Thursday and Friday off in that regard.
Yes.
And one shift.
Excellent.